Welcome to the HindmanCast, a podcast of the Hindman Settlement School, where we explore the history, culture, and people that make the Hindman Settlement School what it is today, and how this historic institution will continue to serve its mission of celebrating heritage and changing lives in Central Appalachia. I'm Corey Terry. And welcome back to a brand new episode of the HindmanCast. It's been a while since we've had an episode here of the HindmanCast. If you will recall, back in 2022, we had this giant, massive flooding that happened here in eastern Kentucky, and ever since that time, all of our offices and spaces have kind of been messed around, and we've made makeshift offices across campuses, and we haven't really had a permanent place here for our production stuff, our video stuff, our podcast. And so it kind of fell by the wayside during that time, but we are finally back into a permanent location here for the HindmanCast, as we have now taken ownership of the Opportunity Center here on campus, and we are high above the waters here in this building on the third floor of this building, and we have a permanent location to do these things now, so we are getting back on it here with the HindmanCast. And as you may have noticed in the intro, my fellow troublesome boy, Jordan Collins, is no longer here with us at the Hindman Settlement School. And we miss him, miss having him a part of the HindmanCast. I miss having the back and forth banter with him as we constantly pick on each other and try to make each other angry all the time. So I miss that. That's gonna be something lost with the HindmanCast. But we're gonna do our best to make the best of it without Jordan. And I know he's not listening, but I love you, Jordan. Anyway, with that, we are also bringing a new structure here with the HindmanCast. So instead of having me do the interviews, when I have no real particular knowledge when it comes to literary arts or traditional arts or music at all, I do have some knowledge with our foodways program, with the growing and everything with that. But since I have no knowledge of these other programs, really, we are going to allow the program heads instead to do the interviews, and I will just be here to sort of introduce you to the episode and come back with any closing thoughts at the end of the episodes as well. So we hope you enjoy this new format, and hopefully it'll get us a more robust interview process going forward and get more information out of our interviews. But today we got a good episode lined up for you. For our first episode back, we have our literary arts program director, Melissa Helton, interviewing a third-time podcast guest, Mandi Fugate Sheffel of the Read Spotted Newt, who is coming out with a memoir on her life here soon, as talking about her recovery from drug addiction. And they also talk a lot about recovery from the flood. As you may know, Eastern Kentucky also just experienced, once again, another round of devastating floods. Thankfully, the Hindman area was largely spared. We had some pretty good flooding here, but no major damage. But other counties surrounding us took a greater hit. So that's the topic of their conversation today. It's a great topic, great interview with them, and I'm going to hand it over to Melissa.
So welcome to the HindmanCast. I'm Melissa Helton, the Literary Arts Director here, and we're in the studio with Mandi Fugate Sheffel. We're excited to be back here. We haven't had any of the podcasts since our flood in July of 22, so we're happy to be here. So Mandi, you want to give a little introduction to who you are and the kind of things you do? And
Sure. This may take a minute because I feel like I wear a multitude of hats. So I guess first and foremost, I'm the owner of Read Spotted Newt, the independent bookstore in Hazard, Kentucky. I also am the Sycamore Fund project coordinator at the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky, and we do work around the decriminalization of mental illness and substance use disorder. Also a writer. Let's throw that in on the end. So that's kind of how I spend the majority of my time doing all the things.
Well, you've been on this podcast a couple times before. Yeah. First time you were on, you had just opened the bookstore December of I think 2020, and in that episode you talk about how 7 days after opening you were flooded out in the store, and then of course there was the the COVID shutdown. What has been going on with the Read Spotted Newt since then, and where's it at, and where do you want it to go, and how's that going?
Yeah, that feels like a lifetime ago, but also, we're in our 5th year now. So from everything I know about small business, I've always heard that, you make it to 5 years, like that's a big hurdle for most small businesses. So I'm happy to have made it into the 5th year.
And that was just this month, right?
Yeah. But January 28th was the opening. So I think, well, one, the store has moved, which I guess it had moved in December when I was here in 2020, but I was on Main Street and had flooded a couple of times. So a building came open that was on higher ground, and I took it not only for that reason, but because the building was larger. The first location was small. So I think, I'm really pleased with the way things are going at the bookstore. I think it's provided a space that people need, especially now. And with when I was planning the bookstore to open the bookstore, I had an idea of what I wanted, and it's really a space that I wanted. I wanted a space to go where readers and writers kind of come together for the love of literature. And I wanted a bookstore. I wanted a place to work on my book, which did not end up happening. That was a pipe dream. There was no time for that. Forgetting that I was running a business, I guess I thought I had romanticized what a bookstore was, I think.
Being a bookstore owner and a bookstore attender is two different things.
Yes, entirely. But I think in a way, it's kind of taken on an identity of its own. Like, it's become more than what I ever imagined it could be. And it's really given me a platform also that was really unexpected. Mm-hmm. So I have found myself in spaces that I hadn't anticipated. I mean, I was like, well, I'm just a bookstore owner. Like, well, why do you want my opinion on things? So that's been an interesting twist to the whole thing.
So other than, for folks who haven't yet been there, definitely go. Other than books, what other kind of stuff do you have in the store, and what kind of events? And
So I try to highlight local artists. That was from day one. That's something that I wanted to do. Because a lot of folks now, they have maybe a social media presence and don't have a brick and mortar where they sell their work. So I wanted to do that for local artists. That's the kind of specialty items that I wanted, like non-book items. I wanted them to be locally made for the most part. So I've worked really hard to reach out to people who are creating in the area and be able to sell their work. And then I try to have at least one book signing a month. The frequency is slowly starting to increase because more and more people are reaching out to me. I'm having to really prioritize what's in the store and also what the market can hold. I have to be aware of, we're in a location where we don't have a very high population. And so it tends to be the same people. It's the same community that show up to events. And, they're not going to come to a reading every weekend. So I have to really prioritize what I think is going to draw people in and the frequency of that.
So you've got kind of a emphasis on local writers or Appalachian literature and creators, but that's not all the bookstore has. Like, you've got the book club that reads very popular kind of national novels as well.
Yeah. So the book club's meeting once a month at the coffee shop, Hazard Coffee Company on Main Street. Also, something you should check out. You can really make a whole day in Hazard, which is fun. But yeah, I think, I primarily sell new books. If there are any used books in the store, it's maybe Appalachian literature that's out of print. If I find those, I usually try to get those and provide those. But for the most part, it's new, all genres. But, my wheelhouse, I feel like, is Appalachian literature. It's what I like to read. It's what I personally hand sell. But I've had the benefit of having two really good booksellers who read outside of that genre that have been able to help me recommend outside of those, which I think is a good compliment to what I can bring, is when I have somebody who's selling something else. So, I feel like, and then we have a whole kids section that sells really well.
Yeah, I love it when you have events down there. It's great to meet the writers and also just be around, even if you haven't read the book yet, to hear excerpts of it. And it's such a great community to kind of plug into. And you mentioned the Hazard Coffee Company. Big fan. Love their selection and stuff. But so like, you're the Newt. You're kind of on this wave. You get to participate and encourage this wave of kind of like a Hazard renaissance that's happening here in Hazard, Kentucky. What has that been like, and this kind of revitalization of downtown and the businesses that are happening there?
And I think that when I talk about having that platform, I think the revitalization of downtown has been a big part of that also. We've gotten a lot of attention, even national attention, at what we've been able to do. And I'm in recovery, and so a lot of times, that's what the conversation will center around, about how this area has been known for the opioid epidemic that started in the late 90s, and how people my age, some of us are in recovery now, if we were fortunate enough to make it into recovery, that we're a big part of revitalizing our communities. And I've always said from the get-go that the bookstore to me felt like an amends. And that's part of being in recovery, is working to make amends to people that you have harmed. And so for me, it was making amends to an entire community, to a place that I could be a member of that community in a different way than what I was maybe 20 years ago. So that's why it's been important to me. And I think that message, and I'm not the only one that's in recovery that's a part of this revitalization. And I think that story has resonated with people, and I think that's why it's gotten the attention that it has. But what I'm finding among the small business owners in Hazard is that we all understand that this is kind of a collective. It doesn't feel like there's no competition, that we all understand what we bring to this revitalization and the role that we play, and how important it is that we have each other. And so there's this huge support, and like the toy store sells my books. Mm-hmm. The coffee shop has my books, and they just do that because they want to support me. It's of no gain to them really. And we all do things like that. There's a great small business association happening in Hazard, and I think it's a collective. It's really a group effort.
I think a lot of our regions, and one reason why this has probably gotten so much national attention is, it's a hopeful story of now that communities need diversified more, or how do you compete in a brick and mortar world with, the internet and everything at your fingertips. And so to see such a vibrant success story, I think is encouraging to other communities who kind of want to take the lessons out of Hazard and apply to their own communities. And we just had bad flooding this month, and several of those businesses were damaged. I know the tattoo shop down there, Lost Gypsy Tattoos, they had to gut the place out. And did I hear something like 40 of the businesses had some kind of flooding down there?
Yeah, I think it's up to 71.
Oh my gosh.
In Perry County as a whole, which the majority of those were in town. And so, it's concerning. And that's something that is still the mucking process, the cleaning out, the moving back in, if they decide to move back in, like those are all still issues that the city of Hazard is dealing with. So I don't know what it's going to look like on the other side of this, because the flooding of 2022 didn't really hit downtown Hazard. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a river flood, so it didn't really impact the city. But this one very much did. I mean, these are some of the highest water levels. I think 1986 was the last time water had gotten this high. And so it's leaving a lot of small business owners with a tough decision to make, because I think they see the part that they bring into the small business community of immediate downtown. And I'm talking about like Main Street, East Main, North Main. But also understanding that they can't continue to clean up like this, flood after flood. And I think just being aware of the fact that we know that this is probably not the last one.
Well, yeah, I think that's something too that a lot of just the citizenry have to keep facing. I mean, how many floods have you been through? When you consider what your bookstore went through, what you went through here on the Hyndman Settlement School campus, what you've gone through in your home. I mean, it's like, is it one a year for the last
5 years? Yeah, it really is. It's one a year for the last 5 years. I've had at least one flood every year that blocked me in, that flooded our road to the point that we were in at least a day, if not, it was 3 this last time. And then 2 that impacted my business when I was on Main Street, and then the 22 flood that I was here.
Yeah, and you get that kind of sense of like, there's so many reasons that we question whether we're going to stay here, or whether we're going to stay in the holler, whether we're going to stay in Appalachia at this point, if we're even going to stay in the United States.
Yeah.
like, and then you there's so many factors that make us question why you stay or why you go, or is there going to be a point where you say, I have to move out of the holler, or I have to move my business to higher ground or to a different location.
Hey, it's me again. I want to interrupt the interview for a brief moment just to take you over to some announcements that we have coming up here at the Hyndman Settlement School. A great place to keep up with all this is, of course, at our social media pages, but you could also go straight to hyndman.org /calendar and check out all of our upcoming events there. So I'm going to take you there now and just show you what we got coming up. First up, coming up in March, we have our Generative Together monthly writing workshops with Nima Avashia, and those happen once every month on the second Saturday of the month going through June of this year. And those are just a great time to get together with other fellow writers and generate poems and writings there using prompts with Nima. And then on March 14th, we also have our monthly square dance coming up. And then on the following day, the following Saturday, we have our monthly Gather and Grow dinner that we have every month, where you can come get free food and listen to a free concert. And this month we have Michelle Canning coming to provide the music for us. And then after that, on March 20th, we have our seed swap and shower with our Grow Appalachia program coming up here at the Settlement School. That's not just for Grow Appalachia. If you have seeds that you want to swap, you can also come for that. We get all kinds of seeds in every year donated to us by our Daughters of the American Revolution, and they do a great job with that. And then also coming up in the beginning of April, we have Spring Writers Retreats with Silas House and also with our host today, Melissa Helton. So check all those out. Check the events out at the Settlement School. Get involved here. We got all kinds of great opportunities for you to get involved, to hone your craft, and just have a really great time. So back to the show.
But you mentioned the flood of 2022 in July that happened and hit Knott County really bad here at the Appalachian Writers Workshop. And we've put together the anthology Troublesome Rising through the University Press of Kentucky. And I was so grateful when they asked me to edit it, and I was so grateful when you said that you would contribute to it. What was going through that flood like? Because this was, I mean, they're each unique in different ways, but what going through that one here on the campus with other writers, and it to have been such a dangerous flood for the region.
Yeah, I think it was different in it's the most impactful, and I hate to say that, but I mean lives lost. I think it was the most devastating. Well, I know it was the most devastating flood that I've experienced, and I was really naive the night that I was staying in the pole house, which is on a hillside. And I left main campus and saw the water, saw that Troublesome Creek was up. But really, I mean, that's not uncommon. So I didn't go to bed thinking I would wake up to a boat traveling down 160. I mean, that's not what I thought was going to happen. And so I really just kind of, others were worried, and I'm like, oh, this happens all the time, and I believed that.
You're like, it happens every year.
Because it does. And then when I wake up and there's no power and just the strong petroleum smell, and I can see a rescue boat where the road is supposed to be, and I still don't think I realized, the gravity of what was happening. That this was just like nothing we had ever experienced before. And so I think, while a lot of the riders that were on campus that week stayed up all night watching, me and a couple other riders that stayed in the pole house, we slept through it, because we had the privilege of being on higher ground. And I really thought that that things were going to be okay. I never imagined it was going to be what it was.
Would you read a excerpt out of the essay that you submitted for that?
Sure. And this, just to give a little backstory, because I'm not going to read it all, I'll just jump in to a section. But so the 22 flood did flood me out of my house. So my hauler was flooded. I could not get home. So the morning when we woke up Thursday, everybody was scrambling to get off campus, and I really had nowhere to go because I couldn't get home. So there were a couple of riders here on campus that had speaking engagements in Abington, Virginia, and they took me with them and let me stay in their hotel. So that gave me space away from here to process what was happening, and riding is usually the way I tend to do that. So I don't know if it hadn't been for that time away that I got, I'm not sure this would have happened. And so this is, it was an op-ed that was published in the Lexington Herald-Leader, but then after I came back and helped with some of the cleanup efforts, I added to it before I submitted to the anthology. So I'm going to jump in about halfway through and just read just a little bit.
Did you say what this was called?
Oh, yeah, thanks. So this is What Water Can't Erase. In the weeks that followed, I found myself restless, and I left home most days with no plan for what to do or how to help. The work seemed insurmountable. Saturday, after the flood back in Hindman, the settlement school had been turned into a makeshift donation hub while also housing displaced flood victims. I helped wash and dry photos from the archives. These photos tell the history of a place that has become more than just a school, but a home for our cultural heritage. Some days I loaded my car with supplies, water, Clorox, gloves, and snacks. I picked a place, any place, because everywhere I looked, people were living in tents and working against the clock to save what they could and remove the flood mud from their homes. As they worked long hours in the heat of August without power, without water, the stench of flood mud lingered in the air. I'd ask them what they needed, and often the response was, "We don't need anything. My neighbor down the road could use it worse than me." From people who had been without a hot meal or a shower for days. I provided what I could, which sometimes meant just a listening ear. Everyone had a story, and they were desperate to be heard. There were days when I mucked houses for strangers and family, rubber boots, crowbars, gloves, and empathy. East Kentucky Mutual Aid, a local nonprofit, became a saving grace for a lot of families by taking donations and putting money straight into the hands of flood victims. Folks who didn't have the time or resources to wait on FEMA. On 2 separate occasions, I was given an envelope of cash and told to give $200 to each household in the hardest hit areas of my county. This small gesture profoundly affected me. As a recovering addict of 17 years, I broke down. There was a time when no one would have trusted me with this task, and rightly so. In the past, I would have used the money for drugs. During this time, I thought a lot about addicts still in active addiction, or those new to recovery, periods of forced isolation, like those caused by COVID and flooding, can cause a rise in relapse rates. Signs on the road say recovery is possible. Today, these signs have a double meaning. Recovery is possible. We know it because we continue to do it. We are constantly recovering from industries that recognize the potential for profit that comes at the cost of our land and its people. I'll
Thank
stop
you.
there.
And so, like, what was it? What is the accumulative kind of effect? I know the flood of 22 was my first big flood, because I grew up in flatland in northern Ohio. We didn't have flash flooding like we do here. And then going through even just witnessing Helene happening at a distance, and our friends and colleagues in the writing community going through that in different locations. And then just the flooding a couple weeks ago that troublesome rose up across this field and got right to the edge of the building, but not in any of them. It's like a re-traumatizing or something, or maybe also a desensitization. As somebody who's gone through like all these floods in their home and in their business and in their community, what's the kind of like a cumulative effect of that on us, do you think?
I don't know. I definitely feel like I'm desensitized. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can feel that. I think my reaction to the 22 flood before I knew just how bad it was, I think that shows almost a desensitization to that type of thing. Yeah. That I was like, oh yeah, this is no big deal. This is no big deal. But now it's like 22 is the benchmark. And there was a period, I guess it was Saturday night of this past flood, the night that it rained so hard. Mm-hmm. And there was a point where it started raining really hard. And we've got 10 roofs at our house. And I was nervous. Like, I was really on edge. I live on a hill, no danger of flooding. But also mudslides are a real potential here. So, I'm thinking, are we safe? Even though we're not by the water, are we safe? And so I'm really on edge, and it makes me irritable. And my son comes downstairs, and he's nervous and can't articulate it. He's 12. Yeah. And so he's pacing the floor, obsessing over the NOAA data. Like, he's figured out how to pull up the graphs that you can see where the river crests and what times, and he's obsessing over that data, and it's all because we can hear the rain increase outside, and it's affecting us both in different ways. And I did my best because I was so on edge. I really didn't want to hear about the NOAA data, to be honest, but he was adamant in talking about it. And so I could see in that moment how we were having a reaction to it was a hard rain, and it had been raining, all day, but it sounds different. There's a sound to it. And I've heard other people say that, or I've seen it on social media where that's a trigger for some people. Like, that's when, I guess it's PTSD from, experiencing this sort of a climate disaster over and over and over, and so we were both having a reaction to it. So that's the way I can see it in my own life. And then, of course, I can't get to the store, can't check on my bookstore because, I'm trapped. And so I'm fortunate in it that, the bookseller that I currently have at the bookstore lives close, within walking distance. So I had him going every couple hours to check it. And it's not necessarily, again, it's like a runoff situation. Like, it's probably not going to be, it's high enough that the river's not going to get to it. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're safe.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So,
yeah, I was watching I was marking the flood coming up out of Troublesome on like the farmers market pavilion, and then to the edge of the stairs by the library, and then to the mailbox. And then when it didn't get past the mailbox, I was able to calm down a little bit. But then, then I start seeing all the reports of the disaster, the destruction in Pike County, in Perry County, and all the surrounding areas. And then it was just, all that nervousness set in. It was like, I need to get out of town for a day or so, and having the privilege that I could go, which so many people couldn't. And just wondering, like, especially for the kids, and these young people having gone through the flood and having gone through repeated things like this in COVID, and like what is their mental health situations going to be as people growing up. And you mentioned starting the essay From Troublesome Rising just immediately while you're in Abingdon as a like writing to process, and you have a new memoir coming out. And you want to tell us about that? And because I've heard you speak that you started writing those pieces kind of like as a way to process grief and all that kind of stuff. Tell us about your memoir.
That was an excellent segue,
Yeah,
by
thanks.
the way. Great job. And that's, and I started this, I didn't know it was a book when I started writing, because that's not what it was intended to be. And I think, I've always been a journaler. That's always been a thing for me. Because I wasn't really a talker. I've been an introvert, and
You're on the news and podcast
know.
and
Yeah,
interviews a
it's-
lot for an introvert.
Yeah, and it's exhausting. But
Thanks for joining us anyway.
but I also, I understand that it's important. So, I was really shy and introverted, and so if I had something that I was going through, that's just what I did. I just wrote it down. And then through my years in active addiction, I didn't really do that, because, that's just, addicts are probably not journaling about their days, surprisingly. So I, once I got into recovery and started doing step work, it's like that light came back on, and it was there again. Like, that's a way to, once I write it down, it helps me process it, and it's not, it doesn't feel as immediate anymore. Like it's not eating me up on the inside. So I had experienced the death of my first cousin, who essentially we were like brother and sister, both only children, and about a year and a half apart. And he remained in active addiction after I got clean. And it's going to be a spoiler alert for the book, but yeah, he was murdered while in active addiction. And so it was a devastating loss for me. And there was a period of time where also I just had my son was about 6 months old when this happened, but I was a little fearful for my own sobriety. I wasn't sure, because, when you first get clean, they'd have you make a list of the things you think might cause you to relapse. And so this was one of the things that was on my list. And like, I didn't know what I could do. I just didn't know if I could make it without him. And so I think having Trip was a good thing. Having my son was something that kept me grounded in the everyday, because I had to take care of him. But also there were all these feelings that I didn't know what to do with. And I felt like I was burdening everybody, because, I think like there's a timeline for grief. People give you a timeline, and then after a certain point, they're like, yeah, like you should, okay, it's been a couple of weeks. Like, why are you still talking about this? And there was this fear, like I would have these really good memories of things that we did, that I was afraid I was going to forget. For some reason, I thought that all this was going to be wiped away because he was gone. And so I started writing everything down. Really at night, when I would put Trip to bed, I would sit in his room until he fell asleep. And that's the time in my whole day that I had to really sit down and do this. So I would sit and write at night while I was waiting on him to fall asleep. And that was in the winter of 2013. So that's when this started, I guess, what would become the nature of pain.
What is that title from?
So the title comes from, I was watching, it was either Beth Macy's Dope Sick, or I was watching a documentary on the Sackler family. And the Sackler family, are the owners of Purdue Pharma, the makers of OxyContin. And that was what really really changed the way I used drugs when that came along.
And devastated our region. And
Yes, yeah. And just was, not just me, a whole generation of Central Appalachians are deeply affected. If they weren't using, then just as a byproduct of the opioid epidemic. So Richard Sackler of the Sackler family is introducing OxyContin to a group of people, almost like a press conference about it, and he says that OxyContin is going to change the nature of pain. And when I watched that, I was like, oh, wow, that's profound in a way that I don't think he expected it to be or intended it to be, but it very much did change the nature of pain.
When does the book come out? And then can you read us a
Sure.
excerpt from it?
So it comes out October the 7th of this year. I'm super excited.
Pre-orders now.
Pre-orders now on readspottednewt.com. Yes. It's hard to promote yourself.
Yeah, it is.
It's a tough thing to do, and writers don't
Especially for an introvert.
expose. Yeah, because I'm like, hey, everybody knows it's coming. You know, they don't want to hear about that anymore.
And it's Read Spotted Newt,
READ.
READ.
Yes.
Follow him on social media.
Like and subscribe. So this is a chapter called Peeling Apples. My computer tells me it's chapter 12 in the book. I don't know. After edits are done, it may not be. So this is Peeling Apples. This is 1994. I don't remember us ever asking what the appropriate age for Seagram and Sprite was, but I do recall that first sip, the first time I had a warm and fuzzy feeling. Alcohol brought a euphoria that washed over me. It felt like the edges had been softened. That sweet burning sensation as it hit my tongue, throat, and belly, burning all the way down. The Seagram's bottle was clear glass, clear as the liquid inside, but not like the brown bottles my dad usually drank. But the gin was clear like the Sprite, which made it easy to conceal. The bottle had tiny knots all over it, making it hard to hold. It was Eric and me again on a summer Saturday night, left to entertain ourselves while the party rolled on. Eric stood lookout while I poured. Is that too much liquor? Reckon what the right pop to liquor ratio. Hell, I don't know. Just hurry up before you get us caught. They don't care. After a few sips, we felt the need to roam. I can't recall if we were drunk or just thought we should be. It was hard to tell at 13. It was always a fine line to experiment but not cross the line and go too far, and we were beginning to get our feet wet. Dovey lived across the road from the trailer Eric grew up in. I don't think we were kin, but she treated us like grandchildren. Dovey's house seemed like a mansion to me, with its paved driveway and carport. Everything was so fancy and delicate on the inside. It was a single-story brick ranch with a barn out back. I never saw any animals there, but it sure made for an excellent place to hide and get into trouble. We'd sneak into the barn's loft and smoke hay. Eric and his mom lived right off the road on Route 19, on 1393, past the curve that seemed to take everybody out. My Aunt Jenny's trailer was brown and white with a front porch added on, covered on one end with a porch swing and a deck on the other. It had some age on it, but she'd worked hard to make it a home. The yard was small, but always neat and well maintained with shrubs and flowers, which gave it color and a sense of pride. Everywhere we went, she would look for a start to dig and take to her backyard. Elephant ears, ferns, rose bushes, whatever she could find. The occasional pot plant in a 5-gallon bucket spray-painted green and hid out back. One bedroom was on the right end and one was on the left, a living room and kitchen in the center. Years later, I know that Dovey owned the trailer and the property. At the time, though, it was Aunt Jenny's, and as much time as I spent there, it felt a bit like mine. Dovey seemed old when we were kids, as far back as I can remember. Her hair was silver and long, way past her shoulders, closer to her waist, and she always wore it up tight in a bun and neatly stacked on top of her head. She'd have on that zip-up floral patterned duster and white tennis shoes. I'd see her and her husband Stanley playing rook at my Granny B's in the wintertime. I don't know why we thought going over there at 2 in the morning was a good idea, but that's what we did. Now it seems to me the real question is why she was up that late. Her in that metal folding chair like the ones you see at a tent revival, pulled right up to the side of the road peeling apples. She had a 5-gallon bucket that she'd been working on most of the night. The warm breeze of summer was blowing the smell of apples all around. As soon as we crossed the road, the smell of freshly peeled apples filled my nose. I had never seen anybody peel an apple in one long piece like a curlicue party decoration. As far as I was concerned, she was the best apple peeler I'd ever witnessed. We went right up and she cut off a slice and handed it to us with her knife. Then she cut a piece for herself and used her knife like a fork. I had never seen anything quite like it. Wallering that apple slice around in her mouth, she said, "Running around here after dark will make your pecker fall off." Eric giggled nervously and said, "Ah, Dovey, you know that ain't true. Ask any man around here that thinks he can fool around after dark." I shuffled around, eager to change the subject. "What are you doing with all these apples?" "Young'uns, I'm fixing to make a mess of pies." I was not eating any pie she made, because one time she fed Eric hog brains and told him it was scrambled eggs. Old folks were trying to get us to believe something crazy. She never let on if she knew we were drinking. She didn't have to peel apples in the middle of the night, but she was nosy. Maybe she only did this so she could make sure whatever was happening across the road at Eric's house. She'd come bright and early the next morning, being as loud as she could, knowing the whole bunch was hung over. She'd bust through the door, never offering to knock, and say, "Get up, y'all, it's time for church." Then she'd laugh, knowing good and well that none of that crowd had ever seen the inside of a church, not since their mommies had made 'em. But she never lectured them or asked why they insisted on spending all night drinking and partying. That's just who they were, and everybody knew it and let them be. That was the first time we had Seagrams and Sprite, but it wouldn't be the last. Maybe because of that first time, and maybe because of the strangeness of seeing Dovey peeling apples in the middle of the night, we always remembered it. Later, it was some sort of shorthand for us. Eric would look at me and say peeling apples, and we'd both lose it, remembering those early days where we still felt safe and looked after, odd as it was.
That's such a almost an innocent, beautiful little moment for these young people. Such a common experience, as having your first taste of alcohol or whatever. But it's also so threatening because both of these people are going to fall into addiction, and so you're just nervous for them. Like nothing terrible's happening in the moment, but you're just so nervous. Why is it important to tell a story like you're doing with your memoir or writing about our flood experiences? Why are these important for, as somebody who loves books and sells books and writes books, why is this an important thing for us to do?
So I felt like for the nature of pain, I hadn't read anything that from an addict's perspective. I think there are some journalists who do a great job at covering, the impact of Purdue Pharma and OxyContin and the epidemic and what it looks like now, where we are now with it. But I hadn't read anything that came from someone's perspective who had actually lived experience. So I felt like it was important for that. Also, I wanted there to be empathy for people in addiction because I think that's something we've lost. That's another thing that we are desensitized to, I think, as people in addiction, specifically here in this area. Or we're really critical of them and their experience and just don't want to be bothered with them. And I get it, it's exhausting. But I think I wanted people to see what the progression looked like. So in a piece like that, that's probably not that uncommon, or maybe it is, I don't know. But in my world, that wasn't an uncommon experience for teenagers to experiment with alcohol. We were probably doing it a little young there. But I don't think that's an uncommon experience. But understanding the way environment and genetics, and then when you have an extractive industry like Big Pharma come in and flood the region with these highly addictive opiates, that's just the perfect storm for what ended up happening to me. And so I think that's important, is that people see, by the time you get to the point where we're using hard drugs, I think people would question if we hadn't. Like, it's no wonder that these kids ended up in this situation. Mm-hmm. So I wanted there to be some empathy there. And I realized that this story was able to do that, or I hope it does.
Well, and it seems like there's such a delicate balance that this memoir needs to strike. There's the stereotypes for our region that everybody has addiction problems, or everybody is going through these things. But to show, like you're saying, the empathy and the nuance of how this played out in one person's life, without giving fodder to somebody who wants to point at the situation. See, I told you this stereotype was true. That there's this delicate balance that having read some of this and heard you speak about it, I know the memoir will be setting the record straight and giving that kind of nuanced understanding and empathy. And I'm excited for people to read it. And you have to go talk to more people about it,
yeah.
podcasts and news outlets.
Yeah. But, it's something I'm passionate about. And so I just kind of, I just show up and do it, and I always feel better after I do. But
well, we appreciate all the work you do as our a designated Appalachian treasure.
Well, what I hope people also, I love the title of Appalachian Treasure. Yeah. I mean, I'm flattered to be. I'm flattered to be that, but also I'm real careful in anything that I do, on whatever outlet it is, to make sure people know that this is one voice of many in this region, and I hope I can offer a different perspective than what's often out there in national media, but that my experience is one of many folks. So I always make sure particularly when I'm talking about people in active addiction, because I don't want my experience to be some kind of bootstraps narrative, where we be like, look, she owns a business and she's doing all these things and she was an addict. Why can't everybody ought to be able to do this? That's not the case. I mean, I had a lot of privilege in my life that allowed me to be in this situation that not everyone has. And so I'm always really careful in interviews to make sure that that's known, because, when you do something that's going to get national attention, I think that's really important.
So now that this book is done, do you have another writing project next that's coming on, or a next phase of evolution for the bookstore, or we just keeping our head above all the floodwaters and swimming? What's next for our Appalachian treasure?
That's the dreaded question to anybody who's writing.
Nosy.
Anybody who's writing, the what's next question is no.
And there doesn't have to be anything next. Maybe you're just pausing and catching your breath.
Well, I had a fellow writer and good friend of mine ask me if I was a one-hit wonder.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, maybe. I don't know. No, I mean, I think I got something that I'm working on that's, it allows me to dig a little deeper into my lineage. And because a whole lot of this book is about my dad's side of the family, because that was the side that my cousin Eric was on. And so I dig a whole lot into that side of my family. But there have been some developments in my personal life that I'm really into, my mom's side of the family, and the fact that we have lived on this one particular piece of land. I would have been the 7th generation of that landholder. So there's a lot of cool characters on that side of the family too. So I've come in digging into some of that research. So that's exciting. I don't know if it's gonna be anything in any length, but I've enjoyed researching it. And as far as the bookstore goes, I think it's more important now than ever to have that space that is inclusive. And again, it's not anything that I set out for it to be, but that's what it's become. And I think that's what spaces like independent bookstores can provide, that it's a safe place for everybody. And Appalachia is diverse, contrary to popular belief. It is a diverse place, and I feel like we're going to need this community in the coming years, and I hope Read Spotted Newt can provide that.
No, well, I'm sure it will. Anything else you wish I had asked you, or anything else you want us to know?
No, I think you did an excellent job at covering. Just it really helps. I'll say this, and for me and everybody else who has a book out there, pre-orders help. They help get gauge interest, and also help me know if this thing's going to work. So I would encourage everyone to pre-order not only Nature of Pain, but all Appalachian writers.
All the books coming out.
All the books.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mandy.
Thank you. This has been great.
And thank you, Melissa and Mandy. It's always great to have Mandy on the program. And, the first time I met Mandy, it was, I guess, back in 2020, around the time she was starting her bookstore. I remember I was contacted by my childhood best friend's cousin, and they were trying to get me to sell bread at her bookstore at that time. And then I met Mandy later on at some point, and realized that she was also related to my childhood best friend, and it was just immediately like family. So I consider Mandy part of family, and always enjoy getting to talk to her and hang out with her. And if you would be interested in pre-ordering and buying her upcoming book, The Nature of Pain, then you can do that very easily. You can go to www.readspottednewt, and that is READ spottednewt.com, and you can pre-order the book there. It's right there on the main page as you go to the website. I've already pre-ordered mine, so I highly encourage you to do the same. It's going to be a great book. And with that, we appreciate you for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.
The HindmanCast is brought to you by the faithful and generous supporters of the Hindman Settlement School. For over 100 years, we've been celebrating heritage and changing lives in Central Appalachia. If you're interested in supporting the work of Hindman Settlement School, you can go to our website at www.hindman.org, or you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the handle @HindmanSchool.